You are listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 14th of April 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Chermak. Coming up on today's program, Iran and the United States hold surprisingly constructive talks, but can the goodwill between enemies really last? From there to Hong Kong, where the city-state's main opposition party is nearing its end, and then...
The pavilion building itself is quite a sight. Its unique architectural design with countless wooden panels arranged in a circular pattern visually represents the theme of circulation.
We visit the pavilion of the host's Japan at the Osaka Expo. We'll also have a look at why Western Europeans are cancelling trips to the US. We'll peek into a Kyoto photo exhibition, and finally...
Good literature, great literature, develops in readers a critical attitude towards the world.
The life of Mario Vargas Llosa, a giant of Latin American literature. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Chermak. Talks held between officials from the United States and Iran in Oman over the weekend marked a surprise change in stance between these two longtime adversaries, particularly under the Trump administration, and they were aimed at preventing a worst-case scenario of yet another conflict building in the Middle East. If there was a positive from the discussions, it lies in Iran's foreign ministry saying they were held in a, quote, constructive atmosphere based on mutual respect. The simple fact that the two countries have agreed to meet again is also a surprisingly positive sentiment. Well, joining me now is Holly Dagres, Senior Fellow with the Washington Institute and author of the weekly Iranist newsletter. Holly, great to have you back on the show. This comment from the Iranian foreign minister, also the White House saying that these talks were, quote, positive and constructive. It's not usually the kind of lines you hear between Iran and the U.S.
Chris, certainly not. And this was actually quite surprising. I think there was a sense of nervousness, at least from the public, that these would actually fall apart. And so when the Iranians first put out the statement, they were, I would say, ahead of the information flow, and they were actually shaping the narrative initially. And so people were actually skeptical about what the Iranians were saying. But then hours later, we heard similar commentary coming out of the White House, and it seemed that they were essentially lockstep. But of course, we'll see how the conversation progresses, which is allegedly supposed to be in Rome this coming Saturday as a part 2, according to Axios.
Well, and as you say, the fact that there were these positive statements coming out of it just leaves room for skepticism given the past. Do you have a sense of why things might be different this time?
Well, let's unpack the past for a minute. U.S. President Donald Trump withdrew from the 2018 JCPOA, or Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, popularly known as the Iran nuclear deal, despite Tehran not violating it at the time. He also assassinated IRGC Quds Force Qasem Soleimani, Commander Qasem Soleimani. And so there's a lot of distrust between the two countries, not just for the Trump administration's actions, but just over the past 46 years. And so what we're seeing now is that despite this trust that's been built up under Trump 1.0, there's this push for talks, and it's because the Iranians are under a lot of pressure. For starters, U.S. President Trump has put out a letter that basically said, at least according to reports, that you need to negotiate within 2 months or face new military strikes. The other bit is that Iran is in a very, I would say, vulnerable position, not just because of the past year's events in the region with the fall of their top ally Bashar al-Assad in Syria, the maiming of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the killing of its head, Hassan Nasrallah. But they're also facing domestic problems. They have a crumbling economy. They have a water crisis, and they're dealing also with historic discontent, as evident by the 2022 Women Life Freedom uprising that continues as a movement. And so the Iranians are really feeling the heat. And so they need some kind of economic reprieve, some sort of band-aid to deal with these issues and at least be able to float for the next 4 years.
Holly, is there really, though, an expectation, I guess? It would also be quite surprising, wouldn't it, for the Iranians, given all of the weakness that you sort of described there from Iran at the moment, for the answer to come from the United States, for the Americans to be their economic savior, if you will. Are they really willing to do what it takes in order for that to happen?
Well, the fact that they're actually meeting and despite the supreme leader saying that these are meaningless talks and that they wouldn't get anywhere and not to trust the United States, I think is really telling. And, there's been a lot of maneuvering about whether they were going to be direct or indirect talks. And again, the Axios report alleges that they were 45 minutes. But then you have Iranian state media outlet Fars News saying that Axios is wrong and that, quote, there was a meeting for a couple of minutes at the initiative of the Omanis. So they're trying to cover their tracks. But I think that this happening so quickly is telling of the situation. For ordinary Iranians, just in the span of the few days, the rial has been at a historic 1 million to the US dollar, and it's already been dropping in numbers because of these talks, not even because a deal has been made. So just seeing that, I think, is actually going to have an economic impact for ordinary Iranians.
At the same time, Holly, I do have to ask, given perhaps also the Trump administration's history, even if there is a deal made here that, say, Iran likes and lifts some of the sanctions, let's say in agreement for an end to a weapons program or monitoring of a nuclear weapons program, the history of the Trump administration would suggest that maybe they allow the authoritarian government of Iran to remain in power. It's not necessarily a positive in that sense for the people of Iran, is it?
It definitely isn't. As I noted earlier, we had the 2022 uprising, and Iranians, I would say, have become overwhelmingly anti-regime. And, one of the critiques of the original JCPOA was that it wasn't more holistic, that it didn't include ballistic missiles and proxies and human rights. And so actually, some colleagues and I co-authored a piece in the New York Times over the weekend about why human rights needs to be included in these talks, because, a lot of these anti-regime Iranians, not all of them, actually believe that it would be giving a lifeline to a regime that they no longer want, because it would be keeping them in power. And yes, there is historic precedent of doing that under the Ronald Reagan era and the Jimmy Carter. Of course, there was some appeasement of authoritarian regimes in other places like Latin America. But the fact that you're able to put human rights on the table with arms control negotiations with countries like the USSR at the time tells us that there is precedent and it is possible to talk about human rights, though it might sound very odd to make these claims given the circumstances right now under the Trump administration. But, it needs to be said.
Holly Dagres of the Washington Institute, thank you very much for joining us. I imagine we'll check in again with you after the second round of talks. And now here's Carlotta Rebello with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. South Korea's impeached president Yoon Suk-yeol has appeared in court today for the start of his criminal trial over charges that he led an insurrection. The ousted politician argued his brief martial law declaration last year was not a coup and has denied all charges against him. Ukrainian officials say 34 people were killed in a Russian missile strike on the city of Sumy in northeastern Ukraine. It's the deadliest attack on civilians so far this year. 2 Russian missiles targeted the city centre as people were gathering to mark Palm Sunday. And Australia's ruling centre-left Labour Party could retain power with a slim majority, according to a widely regarded poll. The survey, conducted for the Australian newspaper, shows support for the Liberal National Opposition has fallen, whilst approval for Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is on the up. The national election is being held on May the 3rd. Those are today's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Carlotta. Members of Hong Kong's opposition Democratic Party voted to move forward with plans to dissolve the party on Sunday. For decades, the Democratic Party formed the city's largest opposition, But with 4 former party legislators currently imprisoned and electoral reforms effectively barring members from running for office, the party has seen its influence wane. While a final vote is expected in the coming months, this move does signal yet another blow to Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement. And I'm joined now by Hans Tse, Hong Kong Free Press reporter. Hans, thank you very much for coming on the show. Perhaps we could start with some background here. Tell us about how the Democratic Party was established and what sort of principles it advocated for to begin with.
Okay, thank you for having me. So the Democratic Party was established in 1994, and that was 3 years before Hong Kong was handed over back from British colonial rule to Chinese rule. And since then, it's been championing electoral reform and democracy, and ultimately to have universal suffrage for Hong Kong's leader, the chief executive, and the legislature. And it's been seen and considered like a moderate force. Yeah.
And how did that fit in with, of course, Hong Kong famously having, even after the UK and China took over again, the one country, two systems framework? How did the Democratic Party fit into that?
Well, so the one country, two systems framework basically specifies that Hong Kong will keep what it was like in the British colonial era, like the capitalist way of life, and also promising that Hong Kong people will rule Hong Kong, as well as there will be democracy in the future. But that is different from the mainland China, which is run in a socialist system. So that was the framework that governed Hong Kong, and Democratic Party plays a key part in it, being the face or the steward of the opposition camp, that is to fight for democracy and to actually make that accountable or to achieve that goal specified in the framework.
And if they were the force that was pushing for democracy in Hong Kong, are we able to sort of draw a line from that to their disbandment now, given the situation currently in Hong Kong? I mean, how are Hong Kong's own citizens also reacting to this party's potential dissolution?
Well, the public reaction has been largely mute, if I be frank, probably because over the years, especially after 2019, when Hong Kong saw a huge and sometimes violent for democracy protests, and then in the following year, Beijing imposed a national security law to quell dissent. And ever since that, a lot of political parties and civil society organizations have already disbanded. And now the Democratic Party is just another one, although it is symbolic because it is one of the largest, it is one of the most historic opposition party in Hong Kong, but the public reaction has been rather mute. Yeah.
And if the public reaction is mute, perhaps you could also describe the situation for the leadership of Hong Kong. What is the political landscape like right now in Hong Kong, given, as you laid out there, the national security law and other measures that have been taken?
The government has been quite clear. They are trying to push forward this narrative that Hong Kong has turned from stability, which is secured after the imposition of the national security law. Now it's moved to prosperity. Now it wants to focus on economic reform. And the member of the press has asked the government this question numerous times. Where will there be prospect of political reform that is promised in the basic law? Will there be a reform that push us closer to universal suffrage? But the government said it's not on the agenda, as it's not in this administration's term. So in the foreseeable future, there is basically no opposition and no government initiative to kickstart that political reform process again.
And if there is no movement to do that, just finally, Hans, I mean, when you speak to either scholars or also the younger generation, people in Hong Kong, I mean, how does that go down as some of these pro-democracy parties are disappearing? What are their views on the future of Hong Kong's democracy movement?
Well, I think there is this view that scholars are saying they're using, I think, a rather academic term called abeyance, and because in the world it's not uncommon for democratic movement to hit some dead end and then maybe go into retreat. In that period, activists may remove themselves from mainstream politics, but they may focus on community work. They may thrive on resilience. They will try to do more groundwork, networking, and to just keep the community going. And that's what we've seen in the past few years in Hong Kong. But one significant note that we have to pay attention to is that the majority of the most prominent politicians or pro-democracy activists are now in jail, or they are not in Hong Kong. Or they have quit politics. So right now, in terms of the pro-democracy movement in Hong Kong, it appears to have loose stream.
Hans Say of the Hong Kong Free Press, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing. I'm Chris Chermak. While Donald Trump's tariffs are threatening to nudge the United States into a recession by impacting consumers and companies, the administration's policies on immigration and perhaps its general attitude towards allies may also be having a broader effect on tourism. Visits from Western Europe to the U.S. fell 17% year on year in March, with some countries, including Ireland and Germany, seeing drops of more than 20%. Well, Paul Charles is founder and CEO of the PC Agency, and he joins us now. Paul, thanks very much for coming on the show. Once again, Ireland, I have to say, caught my eye perhaps more than most of the countries on this list. I mean, if the Irish are wary of visiting the United States, who isn't?
It's a good question, and I think it sums up the uncertainty that's been created by not just Donald Trump's moves on tariffs, but also the wider economy, and whether people are prepared to book last-minute trips or trips for the short term. Where we're seeing some downturn, I think, is in those last-minute trips, those ad hoc trips that might be made by some business people and last-minute leisure travelers.
That is the question, isn't it? I mean, I know it's always hard to judge why people are doing this, but do you get the sense that it is about economics and sort of waiting and see on that front, or is it about values and what the U.S. represents right now, or is it both?
I think there are two things. I think, first of all, there's some anecdotal evidence that restrictions have been tightened a little at certain ports and the immigration entry points into the USA. There have been reports of some travellers being turned back for no obvious reason or for questionable reasons. So that has led to some worry among people who might be going to America. The second thing is undoubtedly the tariff situation and perhaps the seesaw impact of Donald Trump's measures, especially with business people. If you run a small business especially, you won't know whether you're coming or going in terms of tariffs at the moment. And that makes it very difficult to take trips which you might do at the last minute to go and sign a contract with a supplier or to go and do an update meeting with a supplier. And that will definitely have put off some people.
And give us a sense of just how much this matters to airlines in particular, Paul. Transatlantic routes have seen maybe some ups and downs over the years, with certain airlines also trying, say, low-cost routes, not always succeeding. But at the same time, these are about the most profitable routes out there.
They are. The transatlantic is a very busy market, especially between London and New York, of course, which is one of the busiest routes in the world. I think there may be a silver lining in terms of the time frame we're working to. So here we are in April. The April to September period is really the busiest period in the year. That is when most travellers will be taking Easter holidays or summer holidays or half-term holidays during that period. And most tickets for that period are sold in the January to April timeframe. So we've gone past that period when the majority of travellers will have booked their summer trips or their Easter trips. So the airlines are lucky from that perspective. There is some anecdotal evidence already from airlines I've been talking to that they're seeing lower baggage loads and fewer travellers in some cases. We've yet to see if that really plays through to their numbers when they report them. But it does seem there is some drop-off in passenger numbers out of the UK as well as out of Germany, for example. What is useful is, I think, the pound and the exchange rate. It hasn't been so bad to go to America recently due to the strength of the pound. That may have led some people not cancelling their trips if they'd already booked them.
Well, and just finally, this is one of the points, isn't it? Because on the one hand, perhaps there is this silver lining that you describe, but we are also seeing, and you said it right at the end, cancellations even of trips that some analysts say has been surprising, sort of showing this abrupt diminishing in demand for the United States. Is that something that surprised you?
No, I think this is a reaction to the uncertainty, the flip-flopping and seesawing of administration policy in some cases at the moment. And yes, whilst it's worse out of Germany in particular, Ireland, as you mentioned, the UK is down, but not down by as much. And I think we're going to see a continuation of this. When we travel, we have a choice of where to travel. And if America loses out, and places like Las Vegas, for example, are losing out big time, it seems, at the moment, but where they lose out, we have a choice of traveling somewhere else. So the gain, whilst it will be America's loss, the gain could well be inbound into Britain from Europe. It could well be other parts of Europe and indeed the Middle East, who may all benefit from a traveller that wanted to go to America now changing their mind and choosing somewhere else.
America's loss is other nations' gain. Paul Charles, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing. The Osaka Expo in Japan opened on Sunday, and today we are introducing the Japan Pavilion, representing the host country. Ryuma Takahashi from Monocle Radio visited the site and sent us this report on the Japan Pavilion, narrated by Mariella Bevan.
The Japan Pavilion embodies the Osaka Expo's theme of designing future societies for our lives. But Japan presents its own take on the concept. The Between Lives Pavilion features exhibitions centred around the idea of circulation that has been deeply rooted in Japanese culture for centuries. Aided by some of Japan's most popular global sensations, characters like Hello Kitty, Doraemon and Bear Bricks, the exhibitions showcase the power of microorganisms and waste recycling technologies. They've even installed a biogas plant inside the pavilion that generates energy from food waste collected throughout the expo grounds. The pavilion building itself is quite a sight. Its unique architectural design with countless wooden panels arranged in a circular pattern visually represents the theme of circulation. The interior is divided into 3 areas, and visitors can begin their tour from any area thanks to its loop-style layout, aided by audio guides that you're hearing elements of during this broadcast.
Ahead of you lies an algae wonderland, seemingly quiet, but possessing astonishing potential. Let's go see what it holds.
In the farm area, Hello Kitty appears dressed as algae to guide you through Japan's food culture and cutting-edge technology. In another space recreating a photobioreactor, which is an algae cultivation device, it's as if you've been transported into the world of algae.
Built to be fragile, made to last. At first, it might sound like a contradiction, but in fact, it's one of the defining features of Japan's traditional approach to cyclical craftsmanship.
In the factory area, Doraemon serves as your guide through Japan's circular manufacturing technologies, which are entertainingly presented in factory-inspired exhibitions.
A massive conveyor belt creeps forward, deep into a cavernous space. Vegetable and fruit peels, straws and cutlery, cardboard packaging, one by one, they are carried into the heart of the Japan Pavilion.
Finally, the plant area focuses on the circulation of waste and water. Bear Bricks is dressed as various substances like water and carbon dioxide, expressing the circulation of waste, microorganisms, and water. There's a fantastical installation highlighting the activities of microorganisms, and a courtyard with a massive basin filled with water that's purified from within the pavilion's plant. From this courtyard, you can fully appreciate the beauty of the pavilion's architecture. this area also features one of the world's largest Mars meteorites, attracting many visitors' attention. The Japan Pavilion offers a rich experience, highlighting Japan's appeal through its distinctive architectural design, factory-style presentations, and pop culture characters. And it's a strong starting pavilion for visitors to the Expo's host nation.
Thank you, Mariella Bevan and Ryuma Takahashi. We will have more from the Japan Expo, Osaka Expo, rather, over the coming days on our news shows. This is The Briefing, and we're going to continue with Japan now because Amah-Rose Abrams, arts journalist, is joining us now on the line from Kyoto for a bit of arts and culture news. Amah-Rose, you're in Kyoto for a special photography exhibition. Tell us about that.
Yes, I'm here in Kyoto for Kyotography, which is a really kind of interesting photo festival that stages exhibitions in an amazing range of venues, from private houses, historic buildings, and even Kyoto railway station, where the artist and street artist and photographer JR has done a huge mural kind of depicting Japan, Japanese society, key figures, and just ordinary people.
And tell us what attracted you to this specifically. What made you decide to go all the way to Kyoto? What sets this one apart?
It's not just the setting of the city is beautiful. It's a very kind of calm and wonderful way to look at photography. There's something about the approach of the festival that combines kind of very well-known household names like Martin Parr and it also kind of maybe people who haven't had the recognition, but very renowned photographers, legends like Graciela Iturbide, who is kind of very famous, but kind of older photographer, female photographer that some people may know, some people may not, but is kind of very much someone to know. And then we have like amazing emerging photographers like Letitia Kim, who is this kind of wonderful kind of photographer that kind of found her way on social media, doing amazing creations, exploring natural Afro hair. She makes very bold political statements on there. She's young. It's a very different thing to analog photography, but you know, it's this way that they seem to build a complete picture of what's happening in photography now and what you should know that attracts me to the festival.
And it is interesting the way you describe it there, Amah-Rose, that even though this is in Kyoto, it sounds like this is a photography exhibition that is sort of trying to marry Japanese, Asian traditions with Western ones as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the photography on view here is from everywhere. We have Adam Rahana, who's American-Palestinian, we have Lee Shulman and Omar Victor Diop. And we have just, it really is a kind of full picture that does encompass both, you know, both the kind of the values we would expect from a high level exhibition happening in Japan, but I guess, tapping into what's happening in photography in general.
Now, one other thing before we let you go, Amah-Rose, that we just wanted to touch upon, because this is a story coming out of the United States that the Trump administration, which has been cutting various bits of funding for humanities and culture, but it is granting money to build a patriotic sculpture park. Tell us about that. Yes,
this is apparently an idea that was first floated in 2021, and it is taking £17 million from both the National Endowments of the Arts and the National Endowments of Humanities to build a potentially 250 monument sculpture park called National Garden of American Heroes. And the cost of each of these sculptures is estimated to be between $100,000 and $200,000.
And this is a sort of pet project of Trump, as you described there, but it is perhaps surprising that with everything else that's been happening, this is one he seems determined to keep.
He's committed. He's bringing it back, and he's determined, apparently, to have this kind of really be realised in the first half of his term. And yes, I mean, even with the staff cuts that have been made to both of those organisations, government organisations, this is a priority, and it's to celebrate some of his favourite figures from American history that vary from George Washington to Frederick Douglass to Humphrey Bogart and Frank Lloyd Wright. Lauren Bacall is another potential person to be realised in sculpture for this, as well as some artists, Ansel Adams, Singer Sargent, John Singer Sargent. It's a huge variety of people, but with 250 monuments to build, there is quite a large amount of choice.
Also coming ahead of the 250th anniversary of U.S. independence, we should add Amah-Rose Abrams. Thank you very much for joining us. This is The Briefing on Monocle Radio. And finally on today's show, one of Latin America's most prominent authors, Mario Vargas Llosa, has passed away in Lima at the age of 89. Vargas Llosa won a Nobel Prize for Literature in 2010, nearly half a century after his first book arrived on the scene all the way back in 1963. Vargas Llosa's life featured dozens of novels, short stories, as well as a short-lived run for president, a television chat show, and a mysterious both friendship and feud with the other giant of Latin American literature, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Well, Natalia Sobervilla Perea is professor of Latin American history at the University of Kent and joins us now. Natalia, thanks very much for coming on the show. How ubiquitous, first of all, I suppose, was Vargas Llosa in Peruvian life?
He was a towering presence, not just because he's a literary giant, but because he always had something to say about what was happening in the current political scene in Peru and in Latin America in general.
That is the point, isn't it? He was not just a literary figure. As I mentioned, he also ran for president and then also left Peru, I understand, in 1993 after that bid and took up Spanish citizenship. So how will he be remembered in Peru?
He will be remembered as the most important author of the 20th century and as the man who really managed to chart the history of Peru, the social mores of Peru, the origins of many of its social conflicts within his literature. But he will also be remembered for his interventions in the search of freedom and liberty. Also, his turn from being a left-winger in his youth to turning into a very libertarian, liberal in his middle age, and towards his old age, probably leaning closer to the right.
Now, Natalia, I understand from one of my colleagues upstairs, we were discussing this, Carlota Rebello says that one of his books, Conversations in the Cathedral, is actually required reading in Portugal, and partly because it deals with Peru's dictatorship, and it was a way of talking about Portugal's dictatorship without actually talking about it. But I do wonder sort of how widespread that kind of thing was, how you would describe the influence that he had across Latin America and the world.
His influence was huge, and it can only be thought of how he wrote not just about Peru, but about the whole region. Some of his novels, like The Feast of the Goat, was on another dictatorship, the one in Dominican Republic of Rafael Trujillo. He also very notoriously went to Mexico and in front of Octavio Paz and in front of all the Mexican intelligentsia declared that Mexico had the perfect dictatorship because it seemed to be democratic. So he was a huge participant in all the debates of what was happening in Latin America, but also more widely about dictatorship, about freedom, about liberty. There was a very important interview that he gave in the 1970s when he was also living abroad. He was living in London in the 1970s for a while. He taught there as well. And he said that even though the Peruvian junta had done interesting things socially, they would never be able to amount to much because they were not democratic. If anything, Vargas Llosa was always a defender of freedom and liberty.
And just finally, Natalia, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about his relationship with Gabriel Garcia Marquez, a sort of on-again, off-again, or rather on-again and then very off-again feud. Do we imagine that those two might be settling their differences in another life?
Well, I mean, there's already been some just talking about that possibility, but the reasons they both kept to themselves. Even after Garcia Marquez's death, and when Vargas Llosa was asked about it, he said he would not talk about it. There's been a lot of elaboration and imagination of what exactly could have happened. But it's interesting that they were two very important figures, each of their own national literature. Garcia Marquez slightly older, but had a very different take on how they wrote and had very different politics. So there's many reasons why their friendship could have broken down.
Natalia Sobrovia Perea, Professor of Latin American History, thank you very much for joining us. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Monica Lillis and Ryuma Takahashi in Japan. Our researcher was Francesca Jilks and our studio manager was Mariella Bevan. The Briefing is back tomorrow at the same time. I'm Chris Chermak. Goodbye and thanks for listening.